Hey guys! Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different that I haven't really ever done before. It's another bookish video, which I love doing, but it's my top 10 books of all time. So most of them are actually classics, but there are a few more modern books, and I'm going to get cracking because I don't want this to be too long, and I just know that I'm going to be able to talk for days about them. And if I keep looking down, it's because I'm trying to decide which one to pick up next. So first up has to be Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I picked this as a kind of emblem for the whole series because it's just so heartwarming and comforting. I've been rereading the series at the moment and I just don't know what it is about Harry Potter that reminds me of Christmas. I think it's because we watch the films every Christmas. It's just something that you do, really, isn't it? And this is my really old battered edition that my grandma bought for herself and gave to me when I was younger. And yeah, just Harry Potter it made so many children read. I really feel as though it was kind of a big, important cultural change, which I know is kind of crazy and a bit out there, but it made everybody read. And if you think about Harry Potter World and the Warner Brothers Studios, think of the impact that it's had. It has to be in the top 10. And before I carry on, this is in no particular order. I would not be able to pick an order of actually which is number 1 and which is number 10. That's just too hard. So next up is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I think I've read this 4 times now, and every time I just fall more and more in love. It's a Victorian novel and it's a kind of, not dystopian, it's a really truly Gothic novel. It's all about the love between Cathy and Heathcliff. Heathcliff is kind of Cathy's adopted brother, which is a bit strange, and they are both kind of dark and twisted and just a little bit hateful. It's the oldest book that I've read where the main characters aren't all prim and proper and lovely. They are horrible people, but they love each other and they can't get married because society forces Cathy to marry somebody of her own standing, whereas Heathcliff is a gypsy whose origins are kind of unknown, and it makes it really hard for her to marry him, and they have a big fight and she ends up marrying this man that she hates, who is kind of pathetic, if I'm honest. But Cathy and Heathcliff's love is dangerous and it's all-consuming and it goes beyond the grave, and it's got my favourite quote of all time in, which I'm actually going to read because why not, and I just love it. "If all else perished and he remained, I should still continue to be. And if all else remained and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger." I think I fell in love with that quote when I was a teenager and I first read the book, and I had that kind of, oh my god, teenage love, hormones raging through my body kind of thing going on, and I've never stopped loving it. So one day I do want that up on my collage wall or somewhere in my house because I just really feel like it encapsulates what it's like to be in love, which is cute and yeah. So going with the Gothic theme, I've got Dracula by Bram Stoker. I've only read this once and it was part of my uni course. I've wanted to read it for ages, but I thought it was going to be one of those books where it's so hyped up and it's so talked about all the time, it was going to be a disappointment, and it was not a disappointment. I think I want to read this within the next year or so. It's just got so many of our ideas about what makes a vampire. A vampire comes from this. So there's lots of vampire bat references, there's lots of blood sucking, there's lots of attacking of virgins, and I'm pretty sure Dracula sleeps in a coffin, and obviously Dracula, Count Dracula, his castle, everything, and it lives up to expectations. So if you're a big fan of like vampires and all that kind of gory tropes, read it. Just read it, and it's I found it quite shocking how kind of sensationalist it was and how sensual it was in terms of when the kind of vampires are sucking blood. It's very graphic. Ooh. Oh, I'm getting so excited. So Again, another Gothic book. I just really, classic Gothic books are just kind of my thing. I want to read more, so if you have any more to suggest, please, please, please suggest them in the comments. So this is The Monk by Matthew Lewis. It's one of the earliest, so it's about 100 years older than Dracula, and this is probably the most shocking book I've ever read. I expected it to be very reserved and kind of early Gothic take on things, yeah, in a very reserved and a very kind of understated way, but it definitely does not. There's a pregnant nun in here, which obviously at that time, even now, you'd be shocked by a pregnant nun, but yeah, she's fallen in love and is forced to become a nun, but she sneaks out to meet her lover and gets pregnant, which is, yeah, just kind of defies anything that the Catholic Church talks about. And then there's a man, or a woman even, that pretends to be a man to become a monk to get closer to the monk that she's fallen in love with. And there's a lot of kind of homoerotic scenes where the monk that she's fallen in love with doesn't realise that she's really a woman, and when he thinks he's a man, he kind of acts very friendly towards, which obviously back in that time is really quite shocking as well. It's just, it had me on the edge of my seat. It was so graphic and so dark. I think if you really do like the Gothic kind of genre, then definitely read this. It's a much less well-known one, but it's amazing, and it's quite short as well. Oh, just so enthusiastic. Okay, so we'll go for something more modern now. It's We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. I think this was brought out in the 90s or early 2000s, and it's about a mother who is writing letters to her estranged husband, kind of about their son and his development. Their son Kevin went into a school when he was a school kid, and basically shot 7 people with a crossbow, and she's kind of discussing whether it was her fault for being a bad mother. Was he, like, did she make this monster, or was he born a monster? She's kind of convinced that from the offset he was bad. So it's kind of her tossing up the nature nurture debate, and again, this is a really graphic book. It's very upsetting. I found the end very traumatic, and it really kept me going, guessing and going, and yeah, definitely read it. I'm going to say that about all of them because I love them all, but pre-warn. So we're going back in time again to Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Again, this is one that I've only read once. I think We Need to Talk About Kevin, honestly, 4 or 5 times I think, but this is another one that had me a little bit shocked. It's about an unmarried mother, and it's written in the Victorian period. Thomas Hardy was somebody who wrote women very well, in my opinion. He wrote very kind of 3D women, if you compare it to Dickens, who, unsure if he ever spoke to a woman in his life. It's very strange that Hardy was actually very cruel to his wife. He didn't really care that much about her until after she died, and he realised that he hadn't cared about her. But yeah, Tess basically gives into her whims, gives into her kind of lust, and ends up as an unmarried mother, and she does not, you know, she basically becomes an exile from society. So it's kind of her journey through life and dealing with that, which I was honestly so surprised when I started reading it to see that that was actually the subject, because of the time that it was written in, and how even like 50 years ago now, being an unmarried mother, people still could have been a bit funny towards you about it. But yeah. So next up is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and it's a really old copy that I've got. It's got this little kind of, it originally belonged to a library, which is really sweet. Yeah, Jane Eyre is by Charlotte Bronte, as I said. So Charlotte Bronte is the sister of Emily Bronte, who wrote Wuthering Heights, if you didn't know. This is a Bildungsroman, which means it takes you from kind of a child, and it follows the character's progression all the way to adulthood or death. And Jane is somebody who was unloved as a child. I think her parents died young and she was passed to a relative that didn't really want her, and eventually when she's still quite young she goes to a boarding school to teach because she doesn't have any money to learn, and she learns whilst teaching at the same time, as far as I can remember. This is another one that I've read a couple of times. Ultimately she becomes a tutor and falls in love with Mr. Rochester, who I would say has a skeleton in his closet, but it's more like a secret wife in his attic. And if you didn't know that, you can't spoil something that's hundreds of years old. And yeah, it kind of deals with her kind of moral, she crosses her own moral boundaries when it comes to that, because she's very prim and proper, and he's already married and he hasn't told her, and he's locked this woman up in his attic. There's so much critical theory about the mad woman in the attic, and how kind of like it's a symbol of Victorian repression, how this woman, this wife, she had a mental illness and she deteriorated and she got locked in an attic and everybody thought it was okay, which it wasn't. This is something completely different. So this is Mouse by Art Spiegelman. Fun fact, this is a edition of it in French because the original is in German, and when I went to buy it for my uni course I was so intent on not buying a German copy that I bought a French one by accident, so that was fun. I did own an English version, but I think I sold it or it's at another house. But it's a graphic novel, so it looks like this. Art Spiegelman is the son of a Holocaust survivor who came to America after the war. Every kind of race is depicted in different ways in the book. So Jews are rats, Poles are pigs, Nazis are cats, so the cats are chasing the rats, and I think Americans are dogs, French people are frogs. So by doing that he obviously makes race the forefront of the book, and it's all about his dad's kind of story about how he ended up in a camp, and yeah, how kind of all his Jewish friends were persecuted and how everything kind of got resolved at the end. And on a similar theme is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I haven't actually seen the film yet, mostly because I'm scared that it's going to be a letdown because the book's amazing and it's set in World War II, it's narrated by Death, and when I first read it I'd never read anything like that. It was kind of the first book that I'd ever really read where the author subverted the kind of normal narrative scene by writing it from the perspective of Death, and it's very emotive. It's very, Death kind of talks to you about how hard it is to be Death, how hard it is to take people away from their life, and it's an absolute heartbreaker. It's about a little girl who just wants to read, but when the Nazis were in power they burnt a lot of books that they considered needed to be censored. And it's kind of about her struggle to actually read and learn and how she kind of rebels against that through books. And lastly is 12 Years a Slave, which I have on my Kindle rather than in a physical copy. I've actually read quite a few different slave narratives because I think they're important to read, basically. So that one is one of my absolute favourites. I haven't seen the film, again, scared of it being a letdown, but the main character is a free man in his state, and basically he gets tricked by some white men into going into a different state where, because he is black, they can make him a slave, and they basically make him a slave and sell him off, and for 12 years, even though he's free and he has the right to be free because he was born in the state he was, he is kept as a slave and he sees so many brutal acts and is treated obviously horrendously. Eventually he frees himself, and it's actually written, you know, kind of, it's his story. The author is writing his own story, so I think it's incredible. A lot of slave narratives, or at least a few, some of the more popular ones, or popular well-known ones, so like Uncle Tom's Cabin is actually written by a white woman, which is very strange. whereas this is actually a slave narrative written by a slave. Yeah, I think it's a really, really important book to read, and you should go read it and read all of these. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. I think this is my favourite video that I've filmed in quite a while, so please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more videos. See you soon, guys. Bye.